Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. What if the biggest threat to your organization's success was the way you plan, collaborate, and steer? Too often, CTOs are held back not by code, but by unrealistic expectations, fragmented priorities, and teams that struggle to truly work together. In today's episode, I'm joined by Joakim von Prónay, an engineer, psychologist, and coach who helps leaders uncover the problems they didn't even know they had. Together, we'll explore how CTOs can become reliable partners, create realistic roadmaps, and lead organizations where change emerges from within. I'm your host, Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises, and helping you lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. If you've ever felt like you're figuring it out the hard way, you're not alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and more at thectoplaybook.com. Your path, your pace, your playbook. So with that in mind, let's get into the conversation with Joakim. Joakim, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the CTO Playbook.
Thank you, Adam. Good to see you again.
Excellent. Now, your background has been all over the place, but it'd be a very good idea just to give us a bit of an idea of where you are at the moment, what it is that you do for organizations, and a little bit about how you've got to that point.
Absolutely. I usually use the elevator pitch that I say I'm an engineer and psychologist by education, coach by passion, and curious by nature. So I do come from a technical background, studied that at a university, statistics, math, all of that jazz. Worked as a software engineer for a while, and I never really enjoyed that work. That was my struggle, because it was some interesting stuff, but I never really enjoyed it. And then at some point, I just got the opportunity to work with people who work with technology instead.
Right.
I jumped on that because it was something different, and I found that very rewarding.
And when you say working with the people who work on technology, was that sort of as a leader, as an engineering manager, or is that in a different capacity?
No, I actually hopped into the role as a Scrum Master.
Right. Okay.
Without having any clue what that was. I just jumped in because it was something different. And that was quite fun. So I continued down that path. And long story short, that led me to where I am now, where I've spent the last 10 years consulting as a management consultant, working with technology leaders and trying to help improve organizational performance for their tech organizations. So that's a long story short.
Excellent. And you work across Germany or across the whole of Europe? I mean, sort of where's your remit in terms of how widely you work?
I'm Swedish originally. I currently live in Germany.
Right.
So in my consulting career, I have been in Sweden, of course. I was a while in London, Denmark, and in a few places in Germany. So I've seen some European cities, and I also worked with companies that had offices in Asia as well as the US. So I've worked across time zones as well.
Yeah, it's always fun when you're working across time zones, isn't it? Excellent. Okay,
yeah.
So quite a broad remit for the way that you work then across cultures as well, which I think is another interesting thing when you're working with people. But I just want to take you back a little bit. So you mentioned that first time you stepped into that Scrum Master role when you sort of the fire was lit for you. What were some of the things that you sort of saw back then and you sort of thought, oh dear me, there's work to do here?
Oh, that's such a long time ago now. I think some of the main things, because I tend to say that the first team that I got the chance to work with was the first high-performing team that I actually managed to build, and most of that was because of my focus, because I put all my work into making sure that this team worked well together. And it was essentially the collaboration aspect of it. Like how can you ease collaboration and make sure that they have the conversations that they need within the team. And it's not a group of 5 people working individually. No, if we come together, share our struggles and hash out ideas and challenge each other, then we will do much better work. And I think that was the main point that I figured out while actually doing this the first time.
So the sort of the one team philosophy rather than the N individuals approach to work then. Awesome.
That's how it started.
And so did that team sort of form your benchmark, if you like, of what great looks like? Or have you managed to find teams or build teams since then that have exceeded that?
I have managed to, having done this for for 10 years now, or over 10 years if you take this first example, you would assume I've built many high-performing teams, right? I can account for 2,
Right.
absolutely, that I can say, yes, these fulfill my definition of high-performing. And I could stretch it to 3. 3 engineering teams. But apart from that, as you get more experience and the perspectives shift a bit, the last 5-6 years, I more so worked with leaders to help them build their teams and their departments. So I haven't been hands-on working with engineering teams for a long time.
Right. So it's mostly coaching the leaders in order to set the foundations for a great team then.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Let's have a look at some of those sort of, I want to call them dysfunctions of a team, but I know that's Patrick Lencioni's title of the book. So rather than that,
exactly.
sort of, some of the things where you've seen that things need massive improvement, or the things where you've seen it going horribly wrong, and you can sort of think, oh, that needs fixing, that needs sorting out.
And one of the first things that I have been that I just keep running around preaching about currently is unrealistic planning, essentially where your engineering teams or the whole IT department, they don't do what they say they're going to do.
Okay. That sounds like a really basic thing.
That sounds like a really basic thing, right? Especially if you take it up on the enterprise level in large organizations. You usually do your quarterly plannings. You plan 3 months in advance, and then you try to deliver on those plans. And what I keep seeing and keep hearing in conversations all the time is that quarterly planning is very hard because you end up not doing what you said you were going to do.
And there must be multiple causes for that, because I've seen this myself. I've seen evidence of it in other organizations that I'm not working with, but sort of it's not that difficult to look over the fence and sort of think what they think they want to be doing, what they're actually doing, don't seem to line up or match up. In your experience, what is it that makes people end up creating these plans, which they probably at the point of creating them know that they're not going to be able to fulfill?
Oh, let me begin with a little story here. Because this answer can go down the mathematical path where we look at Donald Reinertson's product development flow and the principles behind that. But all of those points have been made over and over and over again, and we don't need to rehash those. The mathematical side of this, which is also what I studied at university, is well established at this point. So it's more of a social problem in organizations. But to set the stage here, I was working in one organization. I don't want to mention them by name, but this is an organization that doesn't exist anymore. I still don't want to mention them by name. But a large company in the payment industry. I was working in a department of roughly 150 people, 120 to 150 people, 8 to 10 engineering teams on different continents. And they had this chronic problem that they did absolutely not do any of the things that they planned each quarter. They had and they also had a very bad reputation within the organization.
Right. And by chronic, you mean here quarter after quarter, they didn't do it. Time after time,
quarter after quarter, they never finished the things that were supposed to be finished according to the plan. And this was one of the reasons why I came in, because they needed some help to look at this and see what can we improve here. And there are many, many causes behind this. One of the strong ones was the organization was simply not incentivized to finish things. It was incentivized to start things. All the pressure came from stakeholders and the people requesting the features and functionality to be implemented. They just wanted their thing to be started. Because once it was started, they can go on and look at the next thing that needs to get started. That was how the organization operated. And there was never any follow-up or any repercussions for not finishing anything. That was part of the challenge here.
Right. So that sort of very much points to outside forces on the team for being one of the key causes here of the unrealistic planning.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because also adding a thought to this, it's never been my experience that you will get more work done faster from engineering teams. regardless how you look at it. Because you have highly educated engineers that are trained to do this type of work and they really enjoy it. And most of them go home on the weekend and work on their hobby projects because it's fun. You're not going to get more code and more output and more features from these people than you're already getting. They are doing as much as they can.
And so really it comes down to the processes and framework of the work environment that they're working in order to get the output to be what is measurably interesting.
Yes.
For the organization.
That is my experience.
Excellent. And so therefore, when it comes down to unrealistic planning, that sort of seems like, I mean, it almost seems like an own goal in some ways. If you just start things but never put any pressure on to finish things, it's a very, very unbalanced way of measuring progress and measuring things, because it kind of encourages epic parallelism, and it doesn't take a degree in psychology to know that doing lots of things at once is not going to result in a good output.
No, I can just nod in agreement here. Absolutely. And back to the original question, why do organizations still think this is a good idea? Well, from the limited experience I have from the organizations that I've worked with, less than 20 of this size in the last 10 years, it's because that's the behavior that is incentivized in the organization. This is how they know how to do things. And if something is not working, well, we just need to do a little bit more of what we're currently doing, because at some point it will just burst and then all of a sudden it will be working. That's the mindset and that's the mentality behind this.
So in other words, just work harder.
Yeah, exactly.
But as you point out, most of these people are already working hard because they're doing something they're passionate about. They love what they're doing. It's unlikely that hard work is actually going to result in a magical outcome.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And especially me then coming in for the specific reason to how can you help us improve the situation? I see completely different things because I'm not biased and I'm not colored by the organization and how they do things. That's the point of having external eyes on the systems and on how people do things. And the hardest challenge that I find, especially in this organization that we started with, was to get them to accept that all or nothing approach. Can we just get a tiny improvement of the situation? Would that be acceptable? But if we change a small thing here, will that not improve the situation slightly? That was the whole approach. And in this particular case, in that organization, that just didn't fly. It was all or nothing.
Oh, really? So this was sort of a leadership demand that you come in and fix it completely or not at all?
Not so much from the leadership people, but for the people involved in these processes.
Right. Okay. So the people inside the teams and the people who were worried about it.
Another cause in this particular example was that there was one role that was called global roadmap owner. This was a person responsible for, and on paper I don't remember reading the role definition, but in reality the behavior and what this person did was put things on the roadmap. That was the only thing. If you wanted something on the roadmap, you had to go through this person. That was this person's job. No follow-up or no accountability on delivery or anything. It just needed to look good in a Gantt chart. And it was this person's responsibility to fit it into the Gantt chart.
Interesting, the organizational pressures that it must have taken to get to the point where they appointed that person or that role in the first place.
Exactly. Imagine how you get to that point. And here, the challenge we had here then was as I said, this whole all or nothing approach. And here it comes back to a thing I tend to repeat. When it comes to long-term planning, it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. And this organization was all the time precisely wrong because they added more and more details and they pressured the teams to give more detailed estimates on more granular level on everything. And then they just accumulated all of that up onto a high 3-month roadmap level. And then they just used the argument, yeah, but this comes from the teams. The teams have said that these are the estimates and this is what it looks like, so therefore it is true. Instead of just saying, and I tried to have a pragmatic approach to this and say, if we look at last quarter, how we did and the things we finished, and use that as an indicator, essentially yesterday's weather.
Yeah.
Was it sunny yesterday? Yes, probably sunny today. Well, depending on where you live, of course. But in this organization, it was very much so. If it was sunny yesterday, it was going to be sunny today. And it was to the degree, I remember the numbers roughly, on a quarterly basis on the enterprise roadmap level, they finished about 10 things.
Right.
So all of these 130, 150 people, they did 10 things in a quarter on the roadmap level. But if you looked at it, and if you counted the number of things that were expected to be finished, it was shifting between 50 and 80.
Again, a clear mismatch between input and output.
A clear mismatch between the plan and what the actual reality said. So just to start the conversation here, I tried to use this as a rational argument. If we did 10 things last quarter, is it not reasonable to expect 10 things this quarter? And that's where the argument comes.
Yeah.
No, because the teams have estimated the work and then this is the plan. Yeah, but last quarter they had done that as well. And then you're stuck in this loop here. Like you can't get through the logical reasoning because the teams have estimated, therefore it must be true, and this is the process we use. So we were stuck in this perpetuality for about 9 months, I think.
Wow. Because I've often seen this kind of scenario and sort of the winning argument. I say winning because it doesn't win because of the fact that it's right. It wins because of the fact that it has the heaviest weight. Is that's the way we've always done things. And unfortunately, if that's an argument that's allowed to win, you're almost precluding change from happening when you have that. And it sounds to me as though you had a very similar kind of scenario there where you're trying to argue that, yeah, but that's not actually the way you're doing things. People say, no, but that's the way it's always done. And as though it's sort of some sort of argument closer in a final chapter on the whole discussion. And I found it very, very frustrating when I come up against this. And I can imagine you just mentioned 9 months. It sounds like that must have been very frustrating 9 months.
Yeah, especially on this aspect of it, because then you just have to accept that we're not going to be better at delivering reliably or predictably in any capacity, because the organization does not want it. They're saying they do, but they act in the complete opposite direction. So at some point, you just give up on that. And of course, I worked with fantastic people in this organization, and we did some very good work in the leadership team on other avenues. But this part absolutely did not improve.
So a good parable of what not to do then. So let's scoot to an organization, or maybe to a different scenario, a different time, where we have planning that is, as you say, let's avoid the 100% right, but go for reasonably accurate rather than the 100% wrong. So some organization that's got planning that's sensible, that has a chance of working. What are sort of the next things that you begin to tackle then once you've got planning as sort of a high level discipline working in a more functional way?
To bridge to that, let me a brief example where this approach worked.
Excellent.
Where we brought the quarterly, let's say, the predictability in delivery from 0% to 83%. And here, what do these percentage points represent? Nothing, no fancy statistics, but much so, did we do the things we said we were going to do?
Right.
And if you plan 5 things and then at the end of the quarter you didn't do any of those, well, that's 0%. You did 0% of the work you said you were going to do. Yep. And we managed to get from 0 to 83%. And can you game this metric? Absolutely. Absolutely, you can game this metric. You just plan less. If you say we're not going to promise anything, then you're essentially 100% predictable if you want to game the metric. But the point is, you do need to commit to some stuff.
Yeah. And getting to a number of 83%, just to put that into perspective, that's like saying I'll plan 5 things and I'll get 4 done, plus a little bit. It's in that kind of ballpark. And I'd have said that's probably a pretty good number for most organizations when it comes to planning on a quarterly basis. I think there are organizations that plan on a monthly basis and will probably beat that number, but quarterly, I'd say that's quite a good metric there, actually.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And when you get to that point, when you essentially have this predictability in your delivery. When you come with requests to your technology organization and you say, we want these 5 things, and they say, sure, and you get 4 of them, well, that's pretty good.
I think most leadership teams will be happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be ecstatic about that. And what this then opens up is the conversation around which 5 things are actually the most important.
Prioritization.
If you never get what you want anyway, then you're just going to make sure to throw all the things over to your technology and IT and software departments as possible, and that you get something. And you don't have to be accountable for the actual business impact of any of them. But if you then get 4 of the things you requested, then all of a sudden you have to be accountable for why you chose those 4 things. And that completely shifts the conversation. Because now you don't have to talk about pressuring the teams to do more output. You can shift the conversations to the product side or the product capability or the business side or the business departments and talk about how do we actually impact revenue positively. And this completely transforms the conversation. But in my experience, unless you have some degree of predictability in your output first, the tech organization doesn't take all the blame, then it's very hard to shift the conversation to actual revenue or business impact.
Yeah, to value. And as you say, that's normally the product team or the people who are responsible for product. And that is a key point, isn't it? Because then you go from being essentially a cost line in the budget to being something where you have a positive return on investment. And that's clearly where almost all leadership actually wants engineering to be. But as you say, with unrealistic planning, you can't get to that stage in the first place. Once you have predictable planning, then you get to start actually making a value judgment. And so then how do you make sure that you take most advantage of that? Is the next question, really.
Ooh, so immediately the consultant comes alive in me here. From what perspective? And I will try to answer myself. From one perspective is then from the technical side of things, when we talk about technical depth, as an example.
Yeah, as an example.
Then it gives you a very good context to put your technical debt and your platform transitions, on-prem, go to cloud discussions. You get a good context to compare things in. Because then you can, you essentially force yourself to put a monetary value on those things as well. How much is this tech debt worth? How much are we paying off this tech debt each month? And we have product and business features to compare this to. Then you can have the right conversation. So from a technical point of view, it helps you with that. Do you have a different perspective to add to that? Because I'm drawing a blank now.
No, I mean, generally, when I'm looking at getting the value in the right place, it is exactly that. What's going to pay off for us as an organization longer term? And sometimes that comes down to the discussions around tech debt, especially with a stable product. But other times, it's more opportunity based. As a product organization, we may need to make a decision on, do we do A or B, putting it into our discretionary area in the roadmap for the next quarter. And that could be based on, well, we believe the market's going to move this way, or competitor A and competitor B are actually, moving in these spaces. And so therefore, there's an opportunity size that we can calculate and put a monetary value on, for example.
Yep. No, I agree.
Cool.
I agree.
And so if we're going to take advantage of those then, what are sort of the next blockers you come up against in an organization once you've got, because now we've elevated to that level? Where do we go next in terms of looking for, with our consultants hat on, looking for challenges within the team to try and unblock them to go faster, more, better, higher?
Yeah, the next challenge I see from here is usually insufficient collaboration.
Okay, that seems like a very broad topic.
Yeah, and the people and teams do not work together. And essentially, the organizations I've worked with in the past 10 years have all had some degree of this. And you can identify this in your organization by simply, do people go hands up and say, that's not my problem? To any degree. If they do, then you know that you're not collaborating to the degree that you could. So this would be the next part. And here, as I said, then the way I see it is that first, if The technology organization needs to reach a certain level of predictability in their output so they can't easily be blamed for everything. And then you get to start to talk about value and impact. And this is when you really surface or unveil the challenges with collaboration. And then you start to see what are the actual incentive structures in the organization. What are people incentivized to do? Because when you figure that out, you will understand that everyone that I have worked with have been a rational professional adult.
Yeah. That's a good assumption to make of almost all people that we're going to be working with.
Yes.
The other scenarios have different solutions and they are a different problem in some ways. So it's a good basis point to start from.
Absolutely. So use that as your starting point, because people do things that make perfect sense from their perspective, given their job, their role, their incentive structures, and their intentions. It makes perfect sense. If you don't understand what they're doing, then it doesn't mean that they're doing something wrong. It just means that you need to dig a bit more and know that people will look at you and wonder, what the hell are you doing? For the same reasons.
Yeah.
And this is the starting point for understanding, do we have insufficient collaboration? What are people doing and why are they doing those things?
And so the why are they doing them? This is something that I've discovered is really, I'd say, unique to the larger organizations, because I think in a smaller organization, there's a much smaller amount of places to hide around this. You have fewer specialists or in specialist teams, where it's in a large organization, it's very reasonable to say, hey, look, this is outside my team's scope. I shouldn't be doing this. It should be somebody else. In a smaller organization, especially startups, early stages, they're kind of going, well, it's got to be done. I'm the closest person to it, so I'll reach, grab, and do it. And so the whole incentive thing is really only a question that I've seen come up in mid-size and up organizations. And even then, it gets much more clear in the larger organizations. And when I say larger, I mean sort of 500 people plus. Is that your experience too? This is something that's sort of, if not unique, then at least concentrated in a larger organization size?
Yes, absolutely. I've worked in organizations of sizes ranging from 40 people to 130,000. More so in the space of thousands of people.
Yeah.
So 500 people and above. That's where I have spent most of my time, and it is a challenge that comes with size, absolutely. Because then you need to diversify, you need more roles, you need specialists, absolutely. The challenge here is, or one of the problems I see is when you don't help the specialists to put their specialization into context,
right.
Then they can easily just stick to their thing. No, I'm an expert in this area. What you're talking about doesn't concern me. Well, it does, because we are all working underneath the same the umbrella that is this company and this organization. And another thing you will see is that there is often the case of an escalation culture, that in order to resolve problems and resolve issues, you need to go to your manager, who needs to go and speak to their manager, who needs to take the problem to someone else, and it comes down on the other side of the organizational chart, and then you will have a resolution of the issue come back to you in a Jira ticket or wherever, in contrast to a collaboration culture, where I would say, if you have a problem, you just figure out who to talk to, and then you go talk to them.
Yeah. And I find that this tends to be something that happens most often in organizations that have some very, very common and high bandwidth collaboration routes, where, for example, there's some sort of system that is the communication route between two adjacent teams. And that could be a Jira board. It could be a workflow system. It could be a financial platform, but there's some way in which communication happens between those two teams. But any communication that's outside of that system, it's a bit like watching that movie Ants, where they're all following each other until somebody loses the line. It's like, where do I go? Where do I go? I don't know where to go. And that's when that escalation sort of starts off, because it's sort of the default thing is ask the boss. So when you say a collaboration culture, and you talk about insufficient collaboration, I normally think of it in terms of inefficient collaboration. If you're looking at an organization from the outside, you sort of think, well, just go and talk to that person. It looks obvious, right? Kind of ignore the org chart, ignore the hierarchy. But inside the organization, there's often a culture, a way of doing things, what's expected, and a way in which you can sort of alienate yourself from your colleagues by doing something unusual. Why are you stepping out of line? Why are you going off in a random direction? And so therefore, this idea of a collaboration culture, sort of insufficient collaboration, when you're looking at these larger organizations, what is the cure for it? Because I know what it is for a smaller organization. It's greater context, and it's giving people the permission, the freedom, in fact, the expectation to step out of line and go talk to the direct person. Is it the same from your perspective?
It is the same. The solution is the same, yes. But it's much, much harder to implement. Because as an organization grows and as they grow older as well, the culture becomes really ingrained.
Right.
And you will also have the Edgar Schein's view on organizational culture, that you will have at the bottom, you will have the espoused values. That essentially comes from the way the organization has overcome hardship in the past. They have worked hard together in the past and overcome some large problem, some large challenge, and that memory will remain in the organization, and they will continue to build on that. And essentially, when I come in, my job is to question all of those things, and that is generally not welcomed.
Right, because they're looking at learned values and, hey, look, this is sort of defines who we are in some cases.
Yes, absolutely. But the solution, as you say, in a large organization is the same. You have to help people see that this line that they're trying to follow, it doesn't really exist. There are no repercussions of stepping outside of that line because the line is not there. And I try to, being new as a consultant, you're usually pretty good at being new on the job because you do that constantly. And you just don't, if people say, here's a line that we need to follow or walk along, then I simply say, I don't see a line, I'll go over here. And I do that deliberately and constantly to see how do people react and what doors does that open for me? Because as we say, you said ineffective collaboration.
Yeah,
I think you said.
I said inefficient collaboration. Yes.
Yeah, and that will at least imply that there is some level of collaboration. And what I'm saying below that is the absence of collaboration. So to get to poorly working collaboration, you still need to have collaboration, and this is based on human relationships. And are we connected to other parts of the organization? Do we have a human relationship with them? And most of the cases, when you stay in your team and in your department, you don't have relationships with other part of the organization. So the solution to that is, how do we build relationships? And this is also the precursor to the communication highways, as you phrased it. Like, where does communication and information flow between parties? Well, it's still based on human relationships, and we need to have those. Some you can institutionalize in organizations, absolutely. But most of them, you just need to cultivate that people actually talk to each other.
Yeah. Seems like an obvious thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, seems like an obvious thing. Coming back to the whole, do people talk at the coffee machine? Like, culture is where the coffee chats that you have by the coffee machine. And there is some degree of truth to that, because you build human connection. And those connections are incredibly valuable when you then go back to do your work. You never know when you need to talk to Ben or Alice that you chat with at the coffee machine every morning because you happen to come in at the same time.
It reminds me of one of the largest organizations I worked in. It was a big consulting organization with hundreds of thousands of employees. And I remember one of the most effective rising leaders, he got one of those awards for being a rapid riser through the organization. And I was working on one of the projects with him. It was a project with a consortium of about 6 or 7 companies. And I just watched him work. And it was amazing. For about the first hour or 2 in the morning, he would walk around with a big coffee mug in hand with the company logo on it. And he would just go around and say, hey, Bob, how's your morning? Have you met Sue over here? And he would just literally make these connections. And then somewhere in the middle of it, you'd realize Bob wasn't there anymore. He'd stepped away and he was making the next connection, the next team down. And that was pretty much what he did. Like literally a quarter of his day, every single day, was just introduce people and get them talking. And I can imagine that as, thinking back now with what you're saying here, that sounds like exactly the kind of connectivity spark that will just prompt natural collaboration where probably there wasn't any earlier, simply by making an introduction. It seems like a powerful concept now that I look at it historically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you do it deliberately, and that's also a nice part of work, right? Just go around talking to people. How are you doing? What's going on? How's the dog? And then, oh, by the way, have you met this guy? He also has a dog. Just make the connection. Incredibly powerful.
Cool. So it's a very interesting way when you've got a large organization, get people talking, because collaboration often starts from a very simple basis of, I know who you are. I feel as though I can have a conversation with you now. And yeah, so getting away from the zero collaboration to some collaboration, you can make it more efficient later on as you put in place. Cool. And so on the journey that you take these organizations on then, we've gone through two issues so far. One is unrealistic planning, so planning for things that can't possibly happen historically or never have done in the past. Collaboration that doesn't exist where it kind of needs to. What's the sort of the next kind of thing you come up against in terms of making an impact on the organizations you work with?
Yeah, the third thing that I usually talk about is also the fuzziest and the most problematic. It's fragmented steering. You got to explain to us what you mean by this, because I understand the two words, but let's put them together and work out what that means. And you're an English native speaker, so
indeed.
No, essentially it's connected to strategy, right?
Right.
The first things I ask when I come into an organization on the first day is, what are we trying to do, and why do we want to do that? That's me trying to get a grasp of what's the strategy, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal, what's the North Star, the vision, however you want to phrase it. But what are we trying to do, and why do we want to do that? And in my case, having coming into some troublesome organizations that simply can't do the things they say they want to do, they absolutely don't know why they want to do them. I rarely get an answer to the question.
You don't get an answer at all?
At all. No, I don't get an answer. I don't know. And
wow.
Even worse, I get many different answers.
Is that worse than getting no answer? I feel like getting no answer would be a case of, people could be basically fulfilling their own ambitions. There's always some sort of guidance and steerage. And in the absence of anything, people will take their own, whether it's fulfilling the ticks on their CV or whether it's getting themselves into the next job that they want. They'll take some direction. So I would have thought that none would be worse than having lots of people saying a different thing.
On organizational level, many different answers means that there are many different interpretations of what the company purpose is and what we're trying to do with the products. And that is troublesome, because here the solution or
And I presume you're not talking about minor variations either. I presume you're talking about some fairly significant variations in what people say.
Yes, absolutely. That just point in completely opposite directions, because then you know that they don't have the fundamentals in place to actually collaborate and actually get things done in a timely manner, because they want to go in different directions and they think the company wants to go in different directions. So that's a challenge. And here I usually talk about organizational alignment. So how can we align on the overall goal of the organization? And this is also, it's easier said than done. Much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
And underneath this umbrella, if we do know what we're trying to do and why we want to do that, do we actually have a strategy? And here, when I talk about strategy, I don't mean that you have 100, 200 PowerPoint slides left by a strategy consultancy, or that you have a roadmap for the next 18 months, or you have the milestones laid out. No. Do you have a central rule that you use to gauge and justify all the decisions that you make in the organization? That is the strategy.
Absolutely. Because I've seen it many times. You can come across those things, the many page PowerPoint that got shown once and never saw the light of day again. But also I have seen this scenario where I see one of those PowerPoints, but it does line up with the vision. It does line up with what people are saying consistently. And in those cases, actually, it isn't the equivalent of shoved on a dusty shelf. It's in use. So they can be good. But only if you've got that common understanding, that common reiterated, we're doing this and this is why we're doing it. And so I've come across organizations, not as big as the ones you're working with, admittedly, but I've come across organizations where you see small variance on the overall goal, and even small variance can cause challenges at times, just in terms of the assumptions that people put onto it, or the sort of second order decisions that people take as a consequence of what they read into that vision and direction. So therefore, it's easy to understand when you've got lots of people saying very different things about direction it's going in. It's it's like trying to move a tanker when you've got 4-5 tugboats, but all of them pulling in different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good metaphor. Yeah. And here, let me just add then, because the heavy PowerPoint decks, I've come in after such things have been left in organizations as well. They are very useful elements within the overall organizational alignment and coming up with a strategy. It's not you should absolutely not do them. No, I said you should do these things, because I can say when I've looked at them, I usually come to roughly the same conclusions. Like, yeah, this is roughly what I see as well. I would use slightly different words, but it's pointing in the rough direction that I would see for the company as well. But it doesn't stop there. It's one piece of the overall strategy puzzle. And you also know that this document is going to be outdated in the next 6 to 12 months. Yeah, and you will have to do it again. And then in the strategy work in organizations, I also urge companies, let's build in a process where we do this work ourselves. And then you don't have to bring in externals to fully do this analysis and leave this heavy document here, because we need to build this work into how we work with strategy ourselves. Because doing that work, we will also understand what our strategy is.
I absolutely love Eisenhower's quote on this one. He says, plans are useless, but planning is everything. So when you outsource the planning and you end up with the plans, it's like, you've paid somebody else to do the bit that's actually valuable, and now they've gone away, and what you're left with is a bit that's actually useless at the end of it. It's in my view, totally backwards. Much better is the kind of consulting I think that you're talking about, which is where you go in and go, we'll do this together internally. Then we can give the plan out wherever we want to, because the plan itself we can give that plan to our competitor. It doesn't matter, right? The plan itself is kind of useless. That's going to come out of date very quickly. But the process of going through the planning approach, that's bit where the really valuable bit comes from. And the other thing that provides as a side effect almost always is all the people who are part of that planning are now aligned to it.
Exactly. That's the magic of it. And here, the best example that I've worked with in the past, it's almost 10 years ago now, but is Spotify. I spent some time with Spotify back in the day. And then, I don't know if it's still true, but then they had the goal of winning in music. That was the phrase that they used. And they described winning as reaching 1 billion active users.
Very specific, very measurable.
Yeah. And they limited music to the online music streaming industry. And everyone knew that. On the inside, you asked, what does this mean? It means those. We are a music streaming platform and we want to reach 1 billion active users. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's quite a clear goal. That's what we want to do. And then one of the departments that I worked with, this is also the best example of a strategy that I've seen. The department that I worked with focused on internal finance and internal HR systems and all of those things for the employees. And at the time they were less than 100 million active users.
Right.
So the goal was to essentially be 10 times bigger. So the mission that this department had was enable Spotify to grow 10x while operating effortlessly. And the operating effortlessly part is an important caveat here, because closing the financial books was an incredibly tedious process. It was very complex how they have built that. It was much harder than it should have been, but it was hard due to technical reasons. So the questions that the organization or this department needed to ask themselves was, how can we enable the organization to grow while not sacrificing our ability to close the financial books? And this was the strategy. If you had a feature request or if you had technical debt, if you had anything, you could lean it against this and see, will this enable us to scale will it sacrifice the ability for us to close the financial books? If those questions were yes, it will enable us to scale, and no, it will not reduce performance in this process. Excellent, then it's a good idea.
Fairly clear set of goals. One of the things I love about those goals, both of them that you mentioned there, is they're both the definition of SMART goals. SMART being specific, measurable, achievable, and ambitious. It's time bound is the T, and the R is
relevant or realistic.
Realistic. Yeah. So, and so it sort of defines specifically enough, and yet has a clear ambition in there. SMART goals are normally quite difficult for organizations to come to a good agreement on. So it sort of clarifies we all know how successful Spotify are now, one of the biggest Swedish, if not the biggest Swedish company, and one of the most international. So clearly successful, but then also showing that level of detail under the hood, I think is fantastic, because it shows some of what it takes to get to that level. I didn't mean to interrupt your story, but I just, it seems like an obvious thing, but I just wanted to point out that it is not that common to find such a clear, well-articulated goal that is that satisfies that full criteria, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, 10 years later, it will probably be different. The 1 billion users will probably still be true, but it's probably phrased in a different way. And this is also the interesting thing, because they did this strategy work internally.
Yeah.
Which is why the idea of the Spotify model is irrelevant. How they organized themselves at one point in time. Now, that's not the thing. The thing is that they included the whole organization in understanding and figuring out how can we reach this goal. And that's the thing you should take away from the Spotify model. Do this work internally. It's hard work. Takes a lot of resources, take a lot of effort, but you will get the results.
Yeah. And that overriding decision led to some very, interesting outcomes, because you were telling me about one particular department that took a decision that on the surface might have seemed like it was a bit spurious, but actually take us through that conversation, because that was fantastic.
Oh yeah, exactly. Because one team inside this department, they were in the process of planning their. I don't remember if we did quarterly planning or monthly planning, but they were doing their plan. They had a request, and then one of the engineers just looked a bit curious and said, "Wait a minute. If our goal is to enable 10 times growth, do we know where the breaking points for our systems are? At the current rate of growing?" And all of them looked befuddled at each other and said, "No, we don't really know that." Because they were also responsible for some of the crucial applications in the financial, closing the financial books. They were responsible for some of the financial processing. So the
critical
part
path finances then.
Critical path, exactly.
Yeah.
And then they simply looked to their engineering manager and the product owner and asked, could we spend some time next sprint or the next 2 weeks to figure that out? And they both were like, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. That's fine. And then 2 weeks later, they were like, "Oh, we found a potential issue. This application, with the current rate of growing the organization, it's going to break down in about 3 months' time."
That's really short on that kind of scale.
That's really short, and that, yeah, exactly. And we don't see a quick fix for this. We would probably need to re-architect the whole thing. Can we please do that? Because that is critical to our mission of enabling 10x growth while not sacrificing performance in this process. So this enabled the conversation on, as we go back to the chat that we just had, to talk about what is the actual value and can we deliver things predictably. They simply figured this out, and then they went backwards and said, well, then we have to say no to quite a lot of other things. The product manager was perfectly happy with that. He would say, I would take these fights to the people that are requesting things from me and defend you. Don't worry about that. And the engineering manager had their back as well. And I think they came up with a solution in the next month and a half. I think it was 6 weeks or so. They rebuilt this thing so it would be good for the next 5 years or so.
And the thing I love about this story is that you were talking before about insufficient collaboration. And most of the time when we think about somebody torpedoing the roadmap and putting some big gnarly thing in there that's completely external, we normally think in our heads, oh, that's got to be a leader. That's got to be a manager. That's got to be somebody who's changing the business strategy on you. In this case, it was exactly the other way up. It's an engineer going, given the goals, we ought to check this out, and then get into the data that says we need to do this, otherwise our goal is not achievable. We can't support it. And I think that's one of those things that goes for clarity in steering. I think it shows it beautifully that you're going to end up with, if everybody's really clear on where it's coming from, where everybody's going to, then when a request for a significant change to the roadmap comes up, there isn't an awful lot of politics and arguing about why this thing needs to go in place, because everybody's aligned on where you're going. And the fact that it came from an engineer, an individual contributor, is kind of irrelevant when you've got that kind of alignment. I think it's a fantastic story that highlights that in a really good way.
I mean, and we use this example internally as well a lot to show this is how it's supposed to be. Don't be afraid to share your ideas, concerns. Please share them. You have to. You know what the goal is. You know the systems. You know the technology, and you need to. But it takes hard work to enable an organization to be able to do that.
Absolutely. You can't underestimate the amount of effort it takes to have that kind of alignment, especially the larger organization, the harder it is.
Yep.
Joakim, I absolutely love this. Let's see if we can distill all of this fantastic wisdom down into a playbook that everybody can take away and use for themselves. So I think the very first one we had on the list there was about planning. So make sure that we have realistic planning as the first step to improving your organization.
And a good reminder here is to use the phrase, it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong.
Love that. Very, very simple and easy to remember, and yet easy to apply to a lot of situations. Better to be roughly right than to be precisely wrong. Excellent. Step 2 then was around collaboration. Ensure that you have sufficient collaboration. And I think in many of your cases, many of your examples, it was make sure you have some collaboration between teams, between departments, especially where it's been sort of ossified and baked into the organizational structure. Number 3 then, which was, we had that fantastic Spotify story, align your steering, or make sure you do not have fragmented steering, I think was the phrase you used there. So make sure you've got an aligned vision and goal that everybody can understand clearly, from the most senior manager right down to the individual contributors. And I think fundamentally overall, with those 3 steps lined up, the thing that you sort of get coming out of that is this sense of reliability, predictability coming out of it. Is that sort of the goal that you're aiming for with these transformations that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A phrase that I commonly use nowadays is you need your internal IT and tech department to be a reliable partner. You need reliability. And if you don't understand exactly what that means, look to the people around you. How would you describe a reliable person? Well, essentially, they do what they say they're going to do. They do it on time. They do it with authenticity. If they're unable to do something, they will share that. They will explain why. They will share their intentions, hopefully. They will explain why they do the things they do. And you should expect the same from your internal technology organization. And as a CTO, it is your job to make sure that that technology organization is that reliable partner.
Brilliant. I think it's a very, very simple overriding goal to aim for, and yet such a complete one. It's a no-brainer, really. Fantastic, Joakim. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. How can people reach you, Joakim?
I think my LinkedIn would be easiest. I think most of the stuff is there.
Excellent. So we'll put that link up there in the show notes so people can follow that and get in touch with you from there. If there was one thing, I mean, obviously the show is aimed at CTOs. So if there's one thing that you would say to CTOs who coming into their career or coming into one of their first or second roles, what would you say is the single most important thing for those CTOs to take on board in their career?
I think this is an answer we've heard before a couple of times, not just here, but it is to understand the business. That is the context within which the technology needs to do something. What is the business? Understand the business.
Fantastic. I think it's a great tip. And as you say, it's you're not the first one to say it, but I do think it underscores, if you get that bit right, the other 3 steps in your playbook are going to be significantly easier. And your outcome of having a reliable partner in the technology organization is going to be a much easier goal. Joakim, thanks very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening. and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.